Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. This is actually a rather difficult video to do. As you probably noticed from Tesla's Q1 financial results yesterday, and if you listen to the live stream with Elon Musk and Ashok and other folks, you'll hear it was a difficult conversation. I'm going to primarily focus on autonomous vehicles and AI, etc., but I do need to start by, acknowledging where we are in terms of Tesla. This is difficult. I mean, there is a lot of red here. So you see things that are, down negative 20% year over year for total automotive revenues. It's down 9% for total revenues. Operating expenses have gone up. You've got a bunch of basis points. Adjusted EBITDA has gone down. Cash flow equivalents have gone down. Everything is negative except for really the energy business and some money that they made on interest and things like that and investments. And if it weren't for their energy business and their investments, actually their automotive business would have been a money loser last quarter. So those are stark results because Tesla has been on a massive growth trajectory, and that has come to a crashing halt and reversed itself to some extent. So these are without a doubt difficult times for Tesla, and you could hear it in Elon Musk. I'm going to talk about what he said about autonomy and about the future and about robo-taxis and cybercabs and about Optimus and all of that stuff. But we also have to acknowledge that at least during the portion where he was reading his notes, and it was kind of unusual, he actually was reading it. You could hear him turning pages and actually reading text. He's usually more freewheeling than that, so even that was unusual, but he was very, very down in the way that he was talking and made a few claims that he said were factual that I think would require more proof to be proven to be factual. Anyway, I'm not going to go there. We're just going to talk about other things. So let's take a look at my notes. As I said, Elon was down during his presentation. I'm starting off with kind of the just overall vibe. He seemed much happier during the question and answer session, however, and I thought that the question and answer session was very a bunch of softball questions. I mean, they were all about autonomy and the future and stuff like that. There were not a lot of questions about tariffs, about the current financial situation of Tesla and everything. So I felt like there was either some self-selection on the part of people asking questions or maybe some grooming of the questions to ensure that they weren't too harsh. So I was a little disappointed in the fact that there just weren't some hardball questions. On the other hand, we got some really interesting information about Tesla and autonomy, so that part was actually good. To address, of course, the big elephant in the room, he talks about quote, natural blowback to Doge. And in terms of protests and people not buying the cars, things like that, I would not guarantee that's natural at all. In other words, what does natural mean in this state? No CEO of a company has ever, while being CEO of a company, gone into government and made such massive changes. I don't think you can call that natural. I think that there is some responsibility. I would say that overall, Elon kind of shunted responsibility for all of this stuff off of his shoulders and put it on other people's shoulders. That's just a comment. You can take it or leave it. You might agree or disagree. Anyway, what looks like it's on the more positive end of things, Elon has reiterated that he will be at Tesla and he's backing off of Doge for 1 to 2 days a week, as long as the president wants him on this. So it felt a little bit like declaring victory and retreating. It was like, yeah, we've accomplished what we needed to. I don't know that a lot has been accomplished at Doge thus far. Maybe things will turn out great over the next couple of years. I don't know what the future holds, but I would not claim that there has been a massive amount of revelation of fraud and making things better. It seems to have been kind of bull in a china shop sort of activity going on. So it felt a little bit like saying that he was moving back to Tesla after doing everything necessary at Doge was claiming victory and then retreating, that the classic sort of thing. It's like, yeah, we're winning, and you back up. It is important, of course, to note that Elon said that, Tesla has been on the ragged edge of death many times. This time they are not on the ragged edge of death. That is very true. Even though they had a very subpar Q1, they are still doing fine. They have plenty of money in the bank. Everything is fine on that part. You just don't want this to continue for quarter after quarter. And certainly as someone who is interested in Tesla's mission, to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, that's a good mission. I approve of that mission. And I also am a stockholder. I understand they're not on the ragged edge of death, but it doesn't seem like they're doing great right now. So things are not going well for me as both a supporter of Tesla's mission and also as a stockholder. So whether or not they're on the ragged edge of death, they definitely are down from where they were a year ago. Then we get to some rather positive claims. Elon said that Tesla was the best-selling car in California in Q1 and had the most test drives across the nation or something. That seems a little bit surprising, considering that California is one of the most liberal states. And in particular, in California, you have a lot of people who are very upset with Tesla and Elon Musk in particular. But if that holds true, and we'll have to wait until July to, find out whether that narrative holds, if that holds true, that's actually very positive news. The other really positive news is they were able to transition from the old Model Y to the new Model Y in like the February-March timeframe, and were able to do that within a month globally altogether. That's a pretty remarkable accomplishment, and you have to give Tesla a lot of kudos for being able to manage that. Next up, Elon claimed that absent macro, trends and things like that, he sees no reduction in demand. This goes against industry reports. I've read a lot of reports that say that Tesla in particular is having a contraction of their market share, while other car companies are having expansions of their market share. So I'm not exactly sure where the claim that absent macro trends, Tesla is doing fine comes in, because I feel like Tesla in particular is doing rather poorly right now in terms of global sales versus other car companies. So now we get to the part I want to focus on, which is autonomy, which was really most of what Elon talked about. And then Ashok was there as well. And the Q&A was mostly focused on that as well. So there was a lot of stuff about autonomy. And it all started with Elon talking about the shift to large-scale autonomous cars and robots. In other words, fleets of these things, rather than producing a trickle of them. So this, of course, is something that Elon has talked about, and I've talked about on my channel before, but under the circumstances, it felt just a little bit like an end around the collapse in consumer demand. In other words, what Elon specifically said was that in the future, people will not buy cars. And I personally believe this, and I believe this for a period of time. But basically, if consumers don't buy cars, they don't care quite so much. If you take an Uber, I don't know, sometimes you're like, oh, that car doesn't look as good as another car, but you don't care that much, right? Because you're just going to ride in it for 15 minutes or something. So by banking on people not buying cars and having fleets of vehicles instead, Tesla can sort of avoid this collapse in consumer demand by simply offering rides. And the hope is that people won't be nearly as concerned about taking a robo-taxi ride on a Tesla as opposed to purchasing one. There's a big difference between spending $10 or $15 on a ride versus spending $40,000 or $50,000 on a car, obviously. So it looks like Tesla's hope is that people will accept riding in a robo-taxi over other vehicles because it will be cheaper and comfortable and all of that kind of stuff. And this will be kind of a loophole or end run around the reduction in consumer demand. And during the earnings call, Elon reiterated the claim that Tesla will be the world's most valuable company by X times, some number of times more valuable than the next most valuable company. But he did admit this time there will be, quote, bumps along the road. And finally, before we fully turn to autonomy, I want to play something for you about tariffs. I want you to actually listen to this. I didn't want to play the entire earnings call because it would be crazy for me to play that plus this. This would be a very, very long video. Anyway, I will link the earnings call in the description so you can listen to it if you haven't yet. But I want to play this one section because I think it is worth listening to Elon's tone as he talks about tariffs.
We do have localized supply chains in North America, Europe, and China. So that puts us in a stronger position than any of our competitors. And undoubtedly, I'm going to get a lot of questions about tariffs. And I just want to emphasize that the tariff decision is entirely up to the President of the United States. I will weigh in with my advice with the President, which he will listen to my advice, but then it's up to him, of course, to make his decision. I've been on the record many times as saying that I believe lower tariffs are generally a good idea for prosperity. But this decision is fundamentally up to the elected representative of the people, being the President of the United States. So, I'll continue to advocate for lower tariffs rather than higher tariffs, but that's all I can do.
All right, so you heard that. You heard the very, very large silences. And like I said, I wanted to play it so you could hear it along with me. When I listened to it the first time, I was actually listening at double speed because I was listening after the live thing, trying to catch up. And even at double speed, I was like, that is a long time for him to be silent. So my question is, what is the emotion that's expressed there? It feels maybe like exasperation, but I honestly feel more like it's despondency. It's a little bit of despair. He, I'm sure, has advocated with the president to, to reduce these tariffs, to get rid of them, things like that, they're going to have a big hit. All companies are going to have a big hit, but Tesla will as well. And specifically Mexico and Canada, it sounds like, because a lot of the localized supply chain that Tesla worked on is to reduce it to Canada and Mexico and the US, which made sense because they were all part of a free trade agreement, but that has been blown up at this point. So anyway, my thought is that he is despondent there. Let me know in the comments what you think that emotion is. Maybe I'm reading that incorrectly. I am autistic, so I'm not great at reading emotions, but that's what my guess is, that he is despondent or despairing about the fact that these tariffs are being implemented much against his will. All right, so let's turn to happier things. Autonomy in Austin in June. That was reiterated many, many times during this earnings call. So it sounds like they are, gangbusters on that. Elon said they are laser focused on getting the robotaxi out in Austin in June, and then many cities in the United States by the end of the year. He did say this won't meaningfully impact earnings until the middle or late next year. So that, middle or end of 2026. That makes sense because it will take time for this to all roll out. But these will be paid rides, so that's a big deal. So it's not just that an owner of a Tesla Model Y will be able to do unsupervised driving. In other words, if you own the car, you can not touch the wheel and not pay attention, but there will actually be charged robotaxi rides in June, which means I probably need to purchase plane tickets out to Austin sometime in the near future when the actual date is set, because I think it would be pretty cool to be one of the first riders in a robotaxi. That would be pretty awesome. One important note here, and this is something I called way back on the first day that they said they were going to roll out in Austin in June, and you can check me on this. I was on it. I said Model 3 and Y. I did not say only Model Y. So it's only the Model Y, but it's not going to be the Cybercab. It's not going to be the Cybertruck. It won't be the S and X. It won't even be the 3. It's only going to be Tesla Model Ys. I'm sure it will be hardware for Tesla Model Ys, but those will be the original robotaxis. And during a question and answer session, Elon, or I can't remember if it was Elon or Ashok, one of the two of them said that will be 10 to 20 cars to start with. So they'll start with a very, very small number of vehicles, and then they will expand out to more and more vehicles that will charge for rides. So it's going to be very much a pilot program, right? Really, really small, but the goal is for it to expand really rapidly, not like Waymo or Cruise back in the day, not like one city and they sit there for a year and then they go to another city. But the Tesla in Texas, for example, because I think they'll have the regulatory approval there, if they prove it out in Austin, would be able to go to Dallas and Houston and San Antonio, blah, blah, blah. They'll be able to go out to many other cities in Texas rapidly, as long as they prove out the technology and prove that it actually works. And then we got some really cool information about Tesla's autopilot. There is a public versus a private FSD. Obviously, we knew that because there's developmental stuff, but it sounds like there's an Austin specific branch that they're working on very, very, very hard to make that work better. So they are super focused on Austin by June, which means that folks who are driving Teslas in Austin should get trickle-down effects, because that means that these vehicles, once it eventually rolls out to the public release, are going to be highly tuned to driving in Austin. So it should operate very, very well there. So, nice for you folks who live in Austin. As they said, the goal is to have fleets of Teslas driving around there, as in Austin. And they're also working on the consumer UI, the user interface. In other words, they don't want the red hands, the takeover immediately kind of thing. It's got to fail gracefully. Ashok talked about that, where part of the whole process is to create a system that if it does fail, it fails gracefully. There will be people around remotely somewhere. They are not safety intervention people, and they were very specific about that. In other words, the car will handle itself in terms of safety, but let's say it goes down an alley or something and it can't get out. There can be a remote person that can take over and back the car out of the situation, that kind of a thing, to get the car out of being stuck. So there will be remote operators available, but they will be, just used to extract the car from a situation if it gets stuck. But the car is completely responsible for its own safety. Also interesting is that Austin's private, rollout, the one that they're using internally, has audio input. I made a claim several years ago. I think if I can find it, I'll put a link to it up here. But I made a claim several years ago that Tesla needed to have audio input in order to hear things like emergency vehicles and stuff. So the Austin private version that they're using does have that. That will be very instrumental for full self-driving, like actual autonomous robotaxis, because they will need to be able to hear their environment and know if an emergency vehicle is coming or if there's a big noise or something like that. Another note is that Elon was very, very confident about this happening by June, like really, really confident. Like I said, 10 to 20 vehicles to start with. That seems like a reasonable number because they can watch it and they can gather data and they can control it. They can intervene as much as possible and start to really gather data. So it's a tiny little rollout, but it'll be a good rollout. And again, 10 to 20 taxis is not like 10 to 20 vehicles, right? It's not like it sits in your garage for 19 hours a day or something like that. These can be out for 15 or 16 hours a day when they're not charging. So they can gather a lot of miles even with just 10 or 20 vehicles. A really nice bonus for us, normal drivers with full self-driving is that Tesla is going to reduce the strictness of looking at the road a little bit at a time. So rather than being a binary on-off switch, it's like you have to pay attention to the road and then one day they turn that off. What they're going to do is kind of like when you had to tweak the wheel, is they're going to increase the amount of time between, right? So you can look away, you can look around, you can look down, maybe even text message. You're not supposed to do that yet. But anyway, there could be periods of time. So rather than just like 5 seconds and you have to look back at the road, it could go out to 10 and then 20 and then 30. So that will relax that and it will make it a much better experience for us drivers. So I personally can't wait for that to happen. Next up, Elon and Ashok talked about how they're going to scale rapidly to many cities, again, first in the US, but it's a generalized solution. So Europe and China, etc., as quickly as they can. The goal is for you to be able to go to sleep in the car and wake up at your destination by the end of this year. I think that's 2025. I'm pretty sure I heard that correct. Also, during a question and answer session, one of the questions was, what is the market share going to be? And Elon said 99% plus. And if you think about that, there are millions of Teslas out on the roads, and there's only a few hundred, for example, Waymos in the United States. And if you suddenly enable 1 million robotaxis, a couple of hundred is just a decimal point percentage of market share. So Tesla could easily own most of the market share for a period of time. Other companies will eventually catch up, but at least in the United States and North America, they should have 99% plus market share for a period of time. And that's a big deal. And again, they reiterated this is a general autonomy solution. In other words, if it works in one city, it works in all cities in that regulatory area. Of course, subject to regulatory approval. There will be millions of Model Ys, not Middle Ys, millions of Model Y autonomous vehicles by mid next year. So by the middle of 2026. And Elon did mention that they will probably have localized parameters for things like snowy environments, like if you live in Minnesota or something, very different driving environment than if you live in Los Angeles. So they'll have localized parameters. I think that's all to the good, but that's kind of like a LoRa or a low rank adapter. It's like a little layer on top of other things. But in general, the one solution works for everything. And speaking of that, Ashok actually mentioned, and this was a little Easter egg, this is the first time I've heard about this. He mentioned that Tesla is using a mixture of experts in their autonomous driving. So you may be familiar with mixture of experts from large language models, where a large language model, if somebody asks a question about math, there's a routing model that figures out, oh, this is a math question, I'm going to give it to the expert in math. So the large language model is not monolithic. If it has 1 trillion parameters, maybe 100 billion of those will be related to math, and another 100 billion will be related to coding or something, right? So what this routing agent does is it figures out which of the agents makes the most sense to send this information to. It sends that information, and then that expert agent acts on that information and produces the answer. So same thing with self-driving. That is really interesting to see. We haven't really gotten any kind of in the weeds update like this since September of 2022 when Tesla's AI Day happened. So it's been a long time. I would personally love to find out more about this stuff. If Ashok or anybody from Tesla wants to come on and talk about this in more detail, or you want to produce some papers or anything like that. Anyway, we would love to know about this because this is really, really fascinating stuff, and more details would be amazing. Back on the autonomy front, already right now, I guess all Tesla vehicles drive themselves to the lot. So they go end of line, they drive out of the factory after they've been checked over and everything. They drive on public roads, not private roads. They drive on public roads to their spot in the parking lot, and they park themselves. And Elon specifically noted he would like these vehicles to drive to the customer's house by the end of the year. I think that'd be pretty cool, especially considering I live an hour away from the Tesla dealership. Now, maybe at first they'll have a localization and it will only drive like, 5 or 10 miles or something, but it would be pretty amazing to just, walk out of your house in the morning and have your new vehicle just sitting there waiting for you. That would be pretty darn cool. And he's saying by the end of the year, they think they can do that. So that would be amazing. And then we get the complexity of chasing the nines. Elon talked about how they go many, many days without an intervention in Austin because they're down to like one intervention every 10,000 miles or so. So I guess there is a convoy of Teslas just driving around Austin constantly right now, trying to catch corner cases where there are interventions so they can continue to train. And so he specifically said it's hard to compress these cycles. 10,000 miles is, more or less what one person drives in a year. He's like, they're having to compress this down from years to days to try to catch those corner cases so that they can actually train on this and chase those extra 9s in Austin. So it's a really interesting problem to have, is that the closer you get to the solution, the harder it is to even find the places where it makes a mistake. And then once it does that, you have to collect that data, probably create simulations that are similar to that, and run that over and over and over again, do reinforcement learning, and then produce another version of that and go out and try to catch it in the real world again. But if it's a weird corner case, it just may not happen very frequently. So interesting problems that come up when you're trying to chase the 9s of getting perfect driving. Also, Elon noted that China is showing amazing work. I think by work, he means they're really testing the limits of full self-driving. They recently released it without a lot of Chinese data, and it's driving amazingly well there. Elon said that China has the most demanding consumers, and even talked about one customer drove on a narrow dirt road with snow across a mountain, and said, like, if you fell off, you'd just fall off the edge of the mountain, right? So it's one of those really narrow roads with like a big, drop off on one end. And I was like, wow, that sounds crazy. I don't know that I'd be willing to try that, but apparently they did, and it worked amazingly. Then we got to Optimus. Optimus is not in production yet. It will be in production by the end of the year. It will be produced at Giga Texas, I assume, the Cybercab as well. Elon said this will scale up faster than any product in history. I kind of wonder about that, because I wonder about like the iPhone and stuff like that. But anyway, he said that by the end of the decade, they will be producing millions per year. In other words, as fast as possible. He said in 4 to 5 years, 2029, 2030, 2030, he was pretty definite about. He was like, we'll produce 1 million of these things a year by 2030. He did mention the problems with scaling. It's a completely new supply chain. The only really reused part is the same FSD board as Tesla's. It's actually half of one. So Teslas actually have 2 redundant chips that they have on them, chipsets. And it looks like for the Optimus thing, they cut it in half. But still, that's a board that already exists. But pretty much everything else is being developed from scratch. Crazily enough, Optimus has 10,000 components, and Elon said whatever the slowest component is, that's what makes the factory stop. The factory can't continue if one stupid thing is missing. It's got to wait for that stupid thing to show up so that you can actually continue the factory. So that's that kind of startup ramp that could be very slow. He also, interestingly enough, made a note that the Tesla arms use permanent magnets as opposed to electromagnets. That's for volume. Arms are very small and they need very dense magnetic fields. And so they're using permanent magnets. And that's been hit by China's export restrictions. Apparently, Tesla has to prove that they're not going to use these magnets in military applications. So anyway, it turns out that that's a fairly big bump in the road. China, if you don't know, they kind of own most rare earth minerals, which you actually need to create rare earth magnets. So they have a pretty much of a stranglehold on permanent magnets, and that obviously is causing problems for Tesla, and I'm sure many other companies as well. But anyway, regardless of that, Elon said that they will have thousands, produced by the end of this year. Then a few things about the Cybercab and the Gigafactory. They're going to use the Texas Gigafactory to produce the Cybercab. That I think was fairly obvious. Elon again said the factory is the product and their goal is to produce a car every 5 seconds. And he even got down to the speed. He's like, basically that's 1 meter per second or 3 miles per hour that the car has to be able to travel through the production line in order to produce one every 5 seconds. That's, a reasonably brisk walk on the part of a human being. So it's kind of crazy. Currently, their record is 33 seconds per car in Shanghai, so around about 6 times slower than that. And he said that they will have to use robots moving really fast to do this as quickly as they want to. In other words, humans just simply can't move fast enough to create these cars once per every 5 seconds. So they're going to have to shift over to more and more autonomy, which of course is where Optimus will come in. And finally, one other weird little Easter egg, Elon mentioned in talking about batteries and localizing battery supply that they want to have no anode in their batteries. That I heard him say that. I was like, I don't know how you do that. Hopefully Jordan from The Limiting Factor will go into more detail about this and explain to us how you can have a battery with no anode, but that was a really interesting little tidbit that came out. Alrighty, folks, that's what I've got. The earnings call, obviously the metrics are very bad for Tesla this quarter. It started pretty rocky, the actual call itself, with Elon talking a lot about other things besides Tesla and kind of throwing out what I thought were excuses rather than taking responsibility for what was going on. But once he turned and they turned like a shock and other folks turned to autonomy and the future, things got much brighter and I was much happier about that. So I'm glad to see that Tesla still has this very bold vision, and I hope that they can get over all of these speed bumps and get to realize that vision soon, within the next few years. Okay, I'm almost afraid to ask, but please let me know in the comments what you think about all of this stuff, particularly the autonomy. Again, as always, please keep the comments civil. Constructive criticism and critical conversation and discussion about matters is great. Yelling and screaming is not so wonderful. So, try to keep it adult in the room. I guess that would be my request. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please like it so other people can find it, and consider subscribing for more of this kind of content and my other ramblings about AI and such. And I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.